Out of all the ancient sages and wise men, none come really close to having contributed as much to Western knowledge as Pythagoras. Although today he is mostly remembered for the theorem of Pythagoras, used in geometry to determine the sides of a right triangle, his contributions are much vaster in both scale and complexity than one might initially assume. His religious and political teachings were the first to fully analyze the sciences of arithmetic, physics, geometry, astronomy, astrology, numerology, music, and philosophy, among many others. Pythagoras, after having traveled around the world looking for knowledge and understanding of the ancient mysteries, returned to Italy around 40 years old and began his philosophical activities. Immediately, he began teaching an ascetic and communal lifestyle, creating a community of disciples called Pythagoreans. His teachings profoundly influenced later thinkers such as Plato, Aristotle, and Euclid, and through these men, founded the modern sciences as we know them. In this first video, we will explore the history of Pythagoras and his community, and then in the second part showcase some of the Pythagorean teachings and their esoteric meanings. The life of Pythagoras is one of the more controversial ancient biographies, mainly because it became popular in later centuries of antiquity to attribute fantastical achievements to him, elevating him to the status of a demigod or divine being. It is thus important to take some of the biographical information with a slight grain of salt. One of the most common legends was that Pythagoras was the son of Apollo. Why this came to be is as follows. Nicarchus, a gem engraver from the city of Samos, and his wife were embarking on a merchant's journey and stopped at the oracle at Delphi to inquire whether the journey would be successful. For those who are unaware, the Pythian oracle at Delphi was a sanctuary dedicated to Apollo in the ancient city of Delphi. This sanctuary was the seat of an oracle called the Pythia, who would offer oracles or messages from the god Apollo after a certain religious ecstasy, which we may discuss in the future. These messages and predictions were extremely valued in the ancient world for their accuracy, and were very much believed to have been messages from the god above. Returning to Nicarchus, after inquiring about his journey, he received the following reply: that his voyage would be lucrative and most conformable to his wishes, but that his wife was now pregnant and would bring forth a son surpassing in beauty and wisdom all that ever lived, and who would be the greatest advantage to the human race in everything pertaining to the life of man. It is important to note that the wife of Nicarchus was not known to be pregnant at the time. According to Iamblichus, an ancient Roman biographer which we will be quoting throughout this video, but when Nicarchus considered with himself that the god, without being interrogated concerning his son, had informed him by an oracle that he would possess an illustrious prerogative and a gift truly divine, he immediately named his wife Pythaeus, from her son and the Delphic prophet, instead of Parthenis, which was her former appellation. And he called the infant, who was soon after born in Sidon in Phoenicia, Pythagoras, signifying by this appellation that such an offspring was predicted to him by the Pythian Apollo. Pythagoras was immediately noticed as a most temperate and venerable youth, so much so that he was honored even by elderly men. Not much is known about his early education and years at Samos, although he was apparently so celebrated and renowned that he became known all around Greece as the long-haired Samian. After his 18th birthday, Pythagoras embarked on his first philosophical journey. He went to the city of Miletus, which was across the sea from Samos, and there he met some of the most important figures in early Greek philosophy. Initially, he attached himself to Thales of Miletus, a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher, and also recognized to have been the first individual in history to have engaged in scientific philosophy. Pythagoras spent some time with Thales, but the latter, having become aware of the youth's extraordinary capacity for learning and philosophy, convinced him to sail into Egypt and learn the ancient wisdom of the Egyptian priest. It is also noted that during this stay at Miletus, Pythagoras most likely became initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries, which we will talk more about in an upcoming video. Pythagoras thus began his journey around the world. He learned a few important lessons from Thales which would then influence his later teachings, namely the sparing of time, for which reason he abstained entirely from wine and animal foods, and only ate foods which were slender and easy to digest. It is said that because of this, his sleep was short, yet his soul was vigilant and pure, and his body was always very healthy. Thus, he first embarked on a ship to Sidon, which was then a city in Syria, and there he became initiated in all of the land's secret mysteries. Afterwards he went to Egypt, and there acquired profound knowledge of the mysteries of Isis and Osiris. It is also said that Pythagoras learned to speak Egyptian from the pharaoh himself, that he studied with the Egyptian priest at Thebes, and he was the only foreigner ever to be granted the privilege of taking part in their worship. The teachings of Pythagoras indicate that he was thoroughly acquainted with the precepts of both Oriental and Occidental esotericism. After Egypt, he returned to Phoenicia and Syria and learned the mysteries of Adonis, and then the lore of the Chaldeans in the vicinity of Babylon. Some also claim that he later traveled to Persia and Hindustan, which is modern-day India, and remained several years as a pupil of the learned Brahmins, which they recited. One author adds that the name of Pythagoras is still preserved in the records of the Brahmins as Yavancharya, the Ionian teacher. Iamblichus states the following about this period. But here, while he frequented all the Egyptian temples with the greatest diligence and with accurate investigation, he was both admired and loved by the priests and prophets with whom he associated. And there he learnt all there was to be learned and visited all excellent places. On this account, he went to all the priests, by whom he was furnished with the wisdom which he possessed. He therefore spent 22 years in Egypt, in the audita of temples, astronomizing and geometrizing, and was initiated, not in a superficial or casual manner, in all the mysteries of the gods, till at length, being taken captive by the soldiers of Cambyses, who were invading Egypt at the time, he was brought to Babylon. Here he gladly associated with the Magi, and was instructed by them in their venerable knowledge, and learnt from them the most perfect worship of the gods. Through their assistance likewise, he arrived at the summit of arithmetic, music, and other disciplines, and after associating with them for 12 years, he returned to Samos at about the 56th year of his age. After this return to Samos, Pythagoras began his philosophical career. In fact, he was the first man to call himself a philosopher, and created the term himself. Before that, wise men were called sages, meaning those who know, but Pythagoras referred to himself a little more humbly as a philosopher, meaning a lover of knowledge, or one who is attempting to find out. Pythagoras didn't stay in Samos for long, probably because of a dictatorship which was arising in the area, and traveled to Crotona, a Greek colony in southern Italy. Initially, he resided in the town's gymnasium, and spoke of philosophy and love of the gods to the youths, who afterwards told their parents about the teaching. These then invited Pythagoras to the Senate house, praised him, and asked him if he had anything to say about the administration of the city. Thus, he began teaching them the abilities of temperance, purity, and piety. And it is said that the townsmen completely stopped visiting prostitutes and harlots, and became extremely faithful to the family. He also taught the importance of few material belongings, friendship, and respect to one's parents and elders, and finally respectful obedience to the law. All these things made Crotona one of the most noble cities of the time. After gaining some followers, Pythagoras started constructing his community on the land near Crotona. There, everything was communal, and disciples would live together in an ascetic lifestyle, although they could return to their private affairs at any time, as long as they kept silent about the Pythagorean teachings. Admission to the school was very difficult, as is said in the famous Pythagorean aphorism that not every kind of wood is suitable for the making of mercury. All applicants were required to go through years of trial without once faltering or speaking to anybody else about their experiences, and only after this would they be admitted to the first degree of the teachings. Once again, they were bound to an oath of silence, and if this was successful, the rest of the subjects would be conferred onto the initiate. These subjects included geometry, architecture, music, art, astronomy, medicine, cosmogony, and the sacred science of numbers. Over time, the community built by Pythagoras came to be enormously popular and known throughout the lands because of the extremely wise men which were educated there, and also the semi-legendary status of Pythagoras himself. It is said by many different sources that he had a golden thigh, which he displayed on one occasion at the Olympic Games. Whether this is an actual fact is indeterminable, mostly because of the lack of details surrounding the golden thigh. We don't know if it was the whole thigh, for example, or just the front or the back, if it was actual solid gold or just golden colored. It is important to note, however, that symbolically, gold was associated with the god Apollo, who is the sun god, so this is probably a symbolic connection between this deity and Pythagoras. On one occasion, a priest from the lands of the north, probably Mongolia, named by the Greeks Abaris of Hyperborea, was traveling near Crotona to collect gold. The Hyperboreans were, according to legend, worshippers of Apollo. This Abaris, after hearing of Pythagoras, went to visit him, and after an encounter with the man himself, thoroughly believed that he was the divine Apollo, to the point that he disregarded his homeland and stayed at the community at Croton. Once again, it is said that the priest was convinced after Pythagoras showed him his golden thigh, a symbol for Apollo and the sun, and afterwards conferred onto him his mathematical teachings and other secret knowledge which we will talk about later. Abaris later went on to travel Greece and Italy and performed many miracles according to writers of the time. The community of Pythagoras was notable in its time for the fact that it accepted women into its teachings as well. In fact, Pythagoras married one of his disciples at about 60 years old, an extremely able and knowledgeable woman who after his death wrote many treatises on his teachings, unfortunately none of which survive to this day. As for the death of Pythagoras and the disintegration of his community, he lived to be about 100 years old and was killed in a fire by one of his expelled initiates, who, because Pythagoras had not admitted him, determined to destroy both the man and his philosophy. This man traveled to a neighboring city, an enemy of Crotona, and eventually persuaded them to attack it, and this attack was victorious. He then rallied a crowd during the night and set fire to the house in which Pythagoras and some of the community's elders were gathering. According to Manly P. Hall, after the death of Pythagoras, his school gradually disintegrated, but those who had benefited by its teachings revered the memory of the great philosopher, as during his life they had reverenced the man himself. As time went on, Pythagoras came to be regarded as a god rather than a man, and his scattered disciples were bound together by their common admiration for the transcendent genius of their teacher. His teachings were not lost, although they remained hidden, and were absorbed by the mystery schools of the time, especially the Eleusinian mysteries, which Plato and so many other great philosophers would later become initiates of. In the second part of this video, we will talk about the teachings of the Pythagorean school and their hidden esoteric meaning. For the time being, we would like to depart with an ancient story about the bond of fellowship which united the members of that community. One of them, who had fallen upon sickness and poverty, was kindly taken in by an innkeeper. Before dying, he traced a few mysterious signs, the pentagram no doubt, on the door of the inn and said to the host, "Do not be uneasy, one of my brothers will pay my debts." A year afterwards, as a stranger was passing by this inn, he saw the signs and said to the host, "I am a Pythagorean, one of my brothers died here. Tell me what I owe you on his account." As for this video, it is over, but the second part should be out very soon. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you soon once again.